The morning mist hung over Fort Braxton's shooting range like a shroud, but at 1,500 yards, the target was crystal clear through the scope. Rose Scott's finger rested on the trigger with the same steady confidence she'd once used to save lives from impossible distances. But today wasn't about saving anyone. It was about proving that some skills never fade, no matter how deep you bury them. For 6 years, she'd been invisible. The quiet janitor who cleaned their toilets, mopped their floors, and listened to their arrogant conversations about marksmanship while they couldn't hit a barn door at 200 yards. They had no idea that the woman scrubbing their mess halls had once held the military record for the longest confirmed kill shot in combat history. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hayes thought he was setting up the perfect humiliation, filming the cleaning lady's inevitable failure for social media fame. Instead, he was about to witness the resurrection of a ghost and discover that some people aren't just good at what they do, they're legendary. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The sunrise painted Fort Braxton in shades of amber and gold as Rose Scott pushed her janitor's cart through the main administrative building. At 35, she had mastered the art of being overlooked, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes focused on the floor, movements deliberate but unremarkable. Her graying brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her standard-issue cleaning uniform hung loose on her lean frame. 6 years. 6 long years since she'd walked these same halls in a different uniform, when soldiers saluted her and officers sought her counsel on matters of precision and patience. Now she was just another face in the background, invisible to the very institution that had once celebrated her as their finest marksman. "Morning, Rose," called Staff Sergeant Jennifer Chen from behind the reception desk. Chen was one of the few people who treated her with basic human decency, a young woman who joined the administrative corps straight from civilian life. "How's your morning going?" "Just fine, Sergeant," Rose replied quietly, her voice barely carrying across the polished floors. "Getting an early start on the day." Rose began her routine in the officers' lounge, a room where the base's leadership gathered for coffee and casual conversation before their official duties began. As she emptied wastebaskets and wiped down surfaces, she listened to the familiar sounds of military life. Radio chatter from the communications center, the distant rumble of transport vehicles, and the ever-present conversation of men who believed their authority made them experts on everything. "Did you see Thompson's grouping yesterday at the range?" Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Hayes was holding court near the coffee station, addressing a small circle of junior officers who hung on his every word. Hayes was everything Rose had learned to despise about modern military culture, a politician in uniform who had climbed the ranks through connections rather than competence. "Pathetic," Captain David Morrison chimed in, adjusting his perfectly pressed uniform. Morrison was Hayes' protege, a man in his early 30s who had never seen combat but spoke about warfare with the confidence of someone who'd watched too many action movies. 8 shots at 300 yards and only 3 on target, these new recruits don't understand what real marksmanship requires. Rose continued cleaning, but her jaw tightened slightly. 300 yards. She'd once made a confirmed kill at 1,847 yards in Afghanistan, a shot that had saved an entire patrol from an ambush. The irony wasn't lost on her that men who struggled to hit targets at basic range distances were critiquing others' abilities. "The problem," Hayes continued, warming to his favorite subject, "is that we've lowered our standards. Back in my day, soldiers understood that shooting was an art form. Now everyone thinks they can pick up a rifle and become a sniper." Rose's hands moved automatically, polishing the same section of table twice as she processed Hayes' words. His day. According to the personnel files she'd quietly reviewed, Hayes had qualified as a basic marksman, barely, and had never served in a combat role. His longest deployment had been 8 months in Germany, where the most dangerous thing he'd encountered was a particularly aggressive bratwurst vendor. "Speaking of marksmanship," Morrison said, pulling out his smartphone, "I've been thinking about organizing a shooting competition for social media content. Show the public what real military precision looks like." Hayes' eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found a new way to promote himself. "Excellent idea. We could invite some civilian shooters, maybe some local law enforcement. Really demonstrate the superiority of military training." Rose finished cleaning the table and moved to the next area, but she continued listening. In 6 years of invisibility, She had learned that people revealed their true selves when they thought no one important was paying attention. "What about using it as a recruitment tool?" suggested Lieutenant Sarah Walsh, the only woman in the group and someone who'd actually served overseas. "Show young people that the military offers opportunities to develop real skills." "Good thinking, Walsh," Hayes nodded approvingly. "We could set up different categories. Handgun, rifle, maybe some long-range shooting. Really showcase the full spectrum of military marksmanship." Morrison was already scrolling through his phone. "I know a videographer who could film the whole thing professionally. We could get thousands of views if we market it right." Rose moved to cleaning the windows, positioning herself where she could observe the conversation while appearing to focus on her work. These discussions always followed the same pattern. Hayes would propose something that made him look good, his subordinates would enthusiastically agree, and they'd spend more time planning their publicity than actually improving their skills. "The key," Hayes continued, "is to make sure we have the right participants. Can't have anyone making us look bad on camera." "What do you mean?" Walsh asked. "Well, we want to demonstrate military superiority, right? So we need to be selective about who we invite. Maybe some civilian hunters who think they're hotshots, but nothing too challenging." Rose's reflection in the window showed no emotion, but inside she felt a familiar mixture of disgust and sadness. This was what her beloved institution had become, a place where appearance mattered more than ability, where leaders were more concerned with looking good than being good. She remembered her first day at Fort Braxton, 12 years ago, when she'd arrived fresh from sniper school with scores that had broken every previous record. Captain Elena Rodriguez, her first commanding officer, had taken her aside after the initial range qualification. "Scott," Rodriguez had said, "I've been instructing marksmanship for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just did. You don't just shoot, you commune with that rifle. That's not a skill you can teach." Those words had meant everything to Rose at the time. She'd grown up poor in rural Montana, the daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. The military had been her escape route, and marksmanship had been her ticket to respect and recognition in a world that had given her very little of either. Now, as she listened to Hayes' plan, his carefully orchestrated demonstration of superiority, Rose felt the weight of how far she'd fallen. From record-holding sniper to invisible janitor, from someone whose skills saved lives to someone whose existence barely registered. "Rose," a voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to see Sergeant Chen approaching with a concerned expression. "Lieutenant Colonel Hayes wants to see you in his office." Rose's blood ran cold. In 6 years of perfect invisibility, she'd been summoned to exactly 0 meetings with senior officers. She followed Chen down the hallway, her mind racing through possibilities. Had someone discovered her real identity? Had she made some mistake that revealed her past? Hayes's office was exactly what she'd expected, walls covered with certificates and photographs that documented a career built on connections rather than accomplishments. Hayes sat behind his desk, his uniform immaculate, his expression carrying the casual arrogance of someone who'd never had his authority seriously challenged. "Ah, Rose," he said without looking up from his paperwork. "Please, sit down." Rose remained standing. "Is there a problem with my work, sir?" "Oh, not at all. Your work is adequate." Hayes finally looked up, his eyes scanning her with the disinterest of someone examining a piece of furniture. "I actually wanted to talk to you about our upcoming shooting competition." Rose's heart began to beat faster, but she kept her expression neutral. "Sir?" "We're going to need additional support staff for the event. Extra cleaning, setup, that sort of thing. I know it means working overtime, but there might be a small bonus involved." Relief flooded through Rose's system, just janitorial duties, nothing that would threaten her carefully constructed invisibility. "Of course, sir. Whatever you need." "Good, good." Hayes was already losing interest, his attention returning to his paperwork. "Chen has the details. That'll be all." As Rose walked back toward the hallway, she heard Hayes' voice behind her, speaking to someone who must have entered the office after her. "Morrison, close the door. I want to discuss the competition setup." Rose slowed her pace, adjusting her cleaning supplies while staying within earshot. "I've been thinking about the targets," Hayes said. "We need something that looks impressive on camera but isn't actually too difficult. Can't have anyone missing shots and embarrassing us." "What about different distances?" Morrison suggested. Start with some close-range targets, work up to maybe 500 yards for the finale. Perfect, nothing too challenging, but it'll look good for the cameras. Rose continued walking, but her mind was spinning. 500 yards. These men were planning a marksmanship demonstration where 500 yards would be considered the ultimate challenge. She'd made combat shots at nearly 4 times that distance. The rest of her morning routine passed in a blur of mechanical motions, mopping floors, cleaning restrooms, emptying trash cans, while her mind processed what she'd learned. Hayes and his circle were planning a publicity stunt disguised as a competition, designed to make themselves look good rather than demonstrate actual military capabilities. As she worked, Rose found herself remembering Afghanistan, where precision wasn't about social media content or career advancement. It was about the difference between life and death, between mission success and catastrophic failure. She remembered the weight of responsibility that came with being the person others depended on when everything went wrong. Master Sergeant Carlos Vega had been her spotter during her final deployment, a career soldier who'd seen more combat than Hayes and Morrison combined. Rose, he'd told her after her record-breaking shot, "There are shooters, and then there are shooters. You're something else entirely. You don't just hit targets, you bend reality to your will." The memory brought both pride and pain. Those days felt like a different lifetime, when her skills mattered, when her expertise saved lives, when she was respected as one of the military's elite performers. Now she was cleaning the toilets used by men who couldn't hit a target at the distances where her career had truly begun. As she finished her rounds and prepared to move to the next building, Rose caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of a window. The woman staring back looked tired, worn down by years of deliberate diminishment. But for just a moment, she thought she saw something else in her eyes, a spark of the person she used to be. The invisible woman was still invisible, but invisibility, Rose had learned, could be both a curse and a powerful weapon. The question was whether she'd ever have the opportunity to use it. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 weeks passed before Rose learned the true nature of Hayes' shooting competition. The revelation came during her regular cleaning of the briefing room, where Hayes was conducting a planning session with his inner circle and several civilian guests. "Gentlemen, welcome to what's going to be the most viewed military marksmanship video of the year," Hayes announced to the assembled group. Rose recognized 2 of the civilians. Jake Peterson, a local hunting guide who ran a YouTube channel called Montana Precision, and Dr. Richard Blackwood, a retired psychology professor who'd written a controversial book about military culture. Captain Morrison was setting up a laptop and projector, clearly excited about his role in the media production. "We've got professional camera crews confirmed, social media promotions scheduled, and I've already reached out to several military influencer accounts for cross-promotion." Rose continued dusting the bookshelves, but her attention was fully focused on the conversation. This wasn't just a shooting competition. It was a carefully orchestrated propaganda exercise. "The beauty of this setup," Hayes continued, clicking through a presentation, "is that we control every variable. We choose the participants, we set the distances, we determine what constitutes success." Peterson leaned forward, his weathered face showing skepticism. "Colonel, I appreciate the invitation, but I've got to ask, what's the real purpose here? Because if you're looking for genuine competition, I know some civilian shooters who might surprise you." Hayes' smile was condescending. "Jake, that's exactly the kind of thinking we're trying to address. The public has gotten confused about the difference between recreational shooting and military precision. This demonstration will clarify that distinction." Dr. Blackwood adjusted his glasses, his academic manner at odds with the military atmosphere. "From a psychological perspective, this could be fascinating. The demonstration of institutional superiority, the reinforcement of hierarchical competence. It's a perfect case study in organizational messaging." Rose's hands tightened slightly on her cleaning cloth. Blackwood's clinical analysis of what was essentially a rigged publicity stunt made her stomach turn. "Exactly," Morrison chimed in. "We're not just showing shooting skills, we're demonstrating the superiority of military training and discipline over amateur enthusiasm." Lieutenant Walsh, who had remained quiet during the discussion, finally spoke up. "Sir, what if the civilians perform better than expected? How do we handle that scenario?" Hayes' laugh was dismissive. Sarah, that's not going to be an issue. We've carefully selected participants who represent typical civilian shooting ability. And even if someone gets lucky with a shot or two, our overall demonstration will clearly show the difference between trained professionals and weekend hobbyists. Rose moved to cleaning the conference table, positioning herself where she could see the presentation slides Morrison was displaying. The proposed competition format made Hayes' strategy crystal clear. Multiple shooting stations with increasing difficulty. But the longest distance was only 600 yards, well within the comfort zone of any competent military marksman, but far enough to intimidate most civilians. The key, Hayes explained, pointing to a diagram of the shooting range layout, is creating the appearance of extreme difficulty while maintaining complete control over the outcomes. We'll have 5 stations: handgun at 25 yards, rifle at 100 yards, precision rifle at 300 yards, long range at 500 yards, and our finale at 600 yards. Peterson frowned. 600 yards isn't exactly extreme long-range shooting, Colonel. I've got hunters in my group who regularly shoot elk at 800 yards. Perhaps in ideal conditions, Hayes replied smoothly, but we'll be shooting in realistic military scenarios: time pressure, wind conditions, elevated stress, factors that separate professional training from recreational experience. Rose had heard enough. She recognized the setup for what it was: a sophisticated con designed to generate content rather than demonstrate genuine skill. Hayes was creating a competition where he couldn't lose, then marketing it as a fair test of military superiority. As she finished her cleaning and prepared to leave, she overheard Morrison discussing the social media strategy. "We're planning to live stream the entire event," he explained to Peterson. "Full coverage, multiple camera angles, real-time commentary. We're expecting at least 100,000 viewers for the live broadcast, with probably double that for the edited highlights." "And what about participants who might not want to be filmed?" Walsh asked. Hayes waved dismissively. "Everyone who participates signs a media release. No exceptions. The whole point is public demonstration." Rose left the briefing room with her mind racing. The competition was scheduled for the following Friday, 6 days away. Hayes was planning to film himself and his hand-picked officers defeating carefully selected civilians in a rigged contest, then broadcast their victory to hundreds of thousands of viewers as proof of military superiority. The thought made her sick. Later that afternoon, while cleaning the base's recreational facilities, Rose encountered Sergeant Chen in the break room. Chen was reviewing paperwork, but she looked up when Rose entered. "Rose, can I ask you something?" Chen's voice carried curiosity rather than suspicion. "You've been here longer than most of the officers. What do you think about this shooting competition they're planning?" The question caught Rose off guard. In 6 years, Chen was the first person to ask for her opinion about anything beyond cleaning schedules. "I don't really have thoughts about military matters, Sergeant," Rose replied carefully. "Come on," Chen pressed gently. "You see everything that happens on this base. You hear the conversations. I'm just wondering what someone with your perspective thinks about all this publicity stuff." Rose considered her words carefully. Chen seemed genuinely curious, not seeking gossip or trying to trap her into saying something inappropriate. "I suppose," Rose said slowly, "that real skill speaks for itself. If you have to stage a demonstration to prove you're good at something, maybe the demonstration isn't really about skill." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "That's what I was thinking too. I mean, I'm just administration, but I've seen the qualification scores. Some of these guys who talk the biggest game, let's just say their paperwork doesn't match their confidence." The comment hung in the air between them. Rose realized that Chen, despite her junior rank, was observant enough to recognize the disconnect between Hayes' public image and his actual capabilities. "Sergeant," Rose asked carefully, "what do you know about the participants they've selected?" Chen glanced around to make sure they were alone, then lowered her voice. "Between us, they've been pretty selective. The civilian shooters are mostly people who entered some kind of contest on social media, weekend hunters, recreational shooters, a few local law enforcement officers. Nobody with serious competitive experience." "And the military participants?" "Hayes, Morrison, and 3 other officers from the command staff, plus Lieutenant Walsh, though I think she's only participating because Hayes insisted on having at least one woman for diversity optics." Rose absorbed this information. Hayes had stacked the deck so thoroughly that the competition was essentially meaningless. It was professional military officers, with home field advantage against selected amateurs, filmed and edited to maximize the appearance of military dominance. "The thing is," Chen continued, "I've seen Walsh shoot. She qualified expert on her last range test. She might actually be the best marksman in the group, but you know Hayes won't let that be the story." Rose felt a spark of genuine concern for Walsh. The young officer seemed decent, one of the few people in Hayes' circle who asked real questions and showed actual integrity. Being used as a token in Hayes' publicity stunt would be humiliating and potentially damaging to her career. That evening, Rose sat in her small base housing unit, staring at a box she hadn't opened in 6 years. Inside were the remnants of her previous life, medals, certificates, photographs from deployments where her skills had made the difference between life and death. She pulled out a faded photograph of herself with her spotter team in Afghanistan, Staff Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, her primary spotter, Master Sergeant Carlos Vega, her backup, Specialist Tommy Kim, their communications expert. 4 people who had trusted each other completely because their lives depended on that trust. "Rose," Vega had told her after her record-breaking shot, "you don't just shoot. You calculate probability. Read weather patterns, understand physics, and then apply all of that knowledge under pressure that would break most people. That's not luck. That's mastery." She remembered the mission that had led to that shot. A Taliban commander had positioned himself on a mountainside, directing mortar fire against a trapped American patrol. The distance was beyond the effective range of standard military weapons, the wind conditions were brutal, and there was no second chance. Rose had spent 43 minutes calculating angles, wind speed, temperature, humidity, and a dozen other variables before taking the shot that saved 12 lives. Now Hayes was planning to demonstrate, quote, military precision by shooting at targets less than half that distance under controlled conditions. Rose closed the box and made a decision that would change everything. She pulled out her laptop, a device she rarely used anymore, and began researching the competition participants. If Hayes wanted to stage a demonstration of military superiority, he should at least be prepared for the possibility that someone might call his bluff. What she discovered over the next 3 hours made Hayes' strategy even more cynical than she'd realized. Peterson, the hunting guide, was indeed an experienced shooter, but his specialty was large-game hunting, not precision marksmanship. The other civilian participants had even less relevant experience. A police officer who qualified with his service weapon twice a year, a weekend target shooter who'd never attempted anything beyond 300 yards, and a military veteran whose last shooting experience had been basic training 15 years earlier. Hayes had essentially recruited people who would make him look good, while ensuring that none of them possessed the skills to pose a genuine challenge. But Rose also discovered something else. The competition rules, as posted on the base's public information board, included a provision that she'd missed during her initial observation. Additional participants may be accepted at the discretion of the organizing committee, subject to availability and appropriate clearances. A loophole, a tiny crack in Hayes' carefully constructed plan. Rose stared at the screen for a long moment, weighing possibilities and consequences. For 6 years, she'd been invisible, safe, forgotten. Stepping forward would risk everything she'd built in her new life. But watching Hayes stage a fake demonstration of military competence while genuine service members like Walsh were used as props in his publicity stunt, that was something she couldn't ignore. Rose opened a new document on her laptop and began typing a simple request, an application to participate in the upcoming marksmanship competition submitted by Rose Scott, base maintenance staff. The invisible woman was about to become visible, and Hayes had no idea what he'd unleashed. Rose submitted her competition application at 0600 hours on Tuesday morning, sliding the envelope under Hayes' office door before beginning her regular cleaning rounds. She had deliberately chosen the earliest possible moment, knowing that Hayes wouldn't arrive for another 2 hours and hoping the application would blend in with his regular morning correspondence. What she hadn't anticipated was Captain Morrison's habit of arriving early to prepare his commanding officers' daily briefings. "What the hell is this?" Morrison's voice echoed through the administrative building at 0645, loud enough to draw attention from several offices. Rose was cleaning the hallway when she heard him on the phone with Hayes. "Sir, you need to get down here immediately. We have a situation with the competition." Rose continued mopping, but positioned herself near Morrison's office where she could observe his growing agitation as he paced behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear. "No, sir, it's not about the media coverage. Someone from the base staff has applied to participate." "Yes, sir, base staff, the cleaning lady." Rose felt a chill run through her system. She'd expected Hayes to simply reject her application quietly. The level of Morrison's panic suggested something else entirely. 20 minutes later, Hayes burst through the building's main entrance like a man responding to an emergency. His usually perfect uniform was hastily assembled, and his expression carried a mixture of confusion and anger that Rose had never seen before. "Morrison, my office, now." Hayes' voice carried across the building with military authority. Rose moved her cleaning cart closer to Hayes' office, taking advantage of a water fountain placement that allowed her to overhear their conversation while appearing to clean the surrounding area. "Explain to me," Hayes said, his voice dangerously quiet, "how a janitor thinks she can participate in a military marksmanship competition." "Sir, technically the rules don't exclude base personnel," Morrison replied, his voice uncertain. "The application form asks for shooting experience, and she claims to have military background." There was a long pause. Rose could hear papers rustling as Hayes presumably reviewed her application. Rose Scott, 6 years of base employment, previously served 8 years active duty. Hayes' voice trailed off. "Morrison, did you run a background check on this woman when she was hired?" "Sir, that would have been handled by personnel before my time here. She's just janitorial staff. Background checks for those positions are pretty basic." Another pause, longer this time. Rose realized that Hayes was encountering the first crack in her carefully constructed identity. Her application had been deliberately vague, mentioning military service without specifying her actual role or qualifications. "Her application claims experience with precision rifles," Hayes continued, his tone growing more concerned. "Morrison, what if this woman is actually qualified?" "Sir, with respect, she's a cleaning lady. Even if she had some basic military training years ago, this competition is going to be broadcast live. We can't have someone making us look unprofessional." Rose felt a surge of bitter amusement. Morrison's definition of unprofessional apparently included the possibility of genuine skill competing against his carefully orchestrated publicity stunt. "Here's what we're going to do," Hayes decided. "Schedule a private screening. Tomorrow morning, 0800 hours at the range. We'll give her a basic qualification test. Something simple that will demonstrate she's not ready for this level of competition. Then we can reject her application based on safety concerns." "Excellent idea, sir. What kind of test?" "Standard rifle qualification, 200 yards, prone position, 10 shots. If she can't group within acceptable parameters, we have grounds to exclude her from the main competition." Rose's heart began to race, but not from fear. Hayes was offering her exactly what she needed. An opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities in a controlled environment before the main event. "Should I invite anyone else to observe?" Morrison asked. "No, keep this quiet, just you, me, and whatever range safety officer is available. I don't want word getting out that we're screening participants. It might give people the wrong impression about our selection process." After Hayes and Morrison finished their discussion, Rose completed her cleaning rounds with mechanical precision, while her mind raced through the implications of what she'd overheard. Hayes was clearly nervous about her application, nervous enough to conduct a private screening rather than simply rejecting her outright. That evening, Rose returned to the box she'd opened the night before. This time, she pulled out a small leather journal, her shooting log from her final deployment. Page after page of precise notations, wind conditions, temperature, humidity, ammunition specifications, target distances, and most importantly, results. She found the entry she was looking for. Day 127, Objective Bravo, target, high-value individual, estimated 1,650 yards. Conditions, 15 to 20 miles per hour crosswind, temperature 97 degrees Fahrenheit, humidity 32%. First shot miss, 2.3 mils left. Correction applied, second shot, confirmed hit. The memory was crystal clear. Taliban commander Rashid Mahmoud directing an attack on a civilian convoy from what he thought was an impossible distance. Rose had been positioned on a ridge with her spotter team, watching through her scope as Mahmoud coordinated the ambush that would have killed dozens of innocent people. The shot had been technically impossible according to standard military doctrine. The distance was beyond the effective range of her weapon system, the wind conditions were brutal, and the target was partially concealed behind rocky terrain. Rose had made the shot anyway. Now Hayes wanted to test her abilities at 200 yards, less than 1/8 the distance of her most challenging combat engagement. The next morning arrived with unusual tension. Rose reported to the shooting range at 0755 hours, carrying herself with the same invisible posture she'd maintained for 6 years. Hayes and Morrison were already there, along with Master Sergeant Tony Russo, the base's primary marksmanship instructor. "Scott," Hayes called out as she approached. His tone was professional, but carried an undercurrent of skepticism. "Thank you for coming. We're going to conduct a basic qualification assessment to ensure you meet the safety and skill requirements for competition participation." Rose nodded quietly. "Yes, sir." Russo stepped forward, carrying a standard M4 rifle. "Ma'am, we're going to start with a basic rifle qualification. Prone position, 200-yard target, 10 shots. You'll have 20 minutes to complete the course of fire." Rose accepted the rifle and examined it with practiced efficiency. The weapon was clean, properly maintained, and fitted with a basic 4x optical sight. Standard military equipment that she knew better than her own heartbeat. "Any questions about the procedure?" Russo asked. "No, sir. May I have a moment to adjust the sight picture?" Hayes and Morrison exchanged glances. Rose's request was technically correct. Any competent marksman would want to zero their optics before a qualification. But neither man had expected such professionalism from a janitor. "Of course," Russo replied. "Take whatever time you need." Rose moved to the shooting position with fluid precision that made Russo's eyebrows rise slightly. Her movements were economical, practiced, automatic. She settled into the prone position with perfect form. Body alignment, weapon placement, breathing control, all executed with textbook precision. Through her scope, the 200-yard target looked absurdly close. Rose had qualified on this exact range hundreds of times during her active duty career, usually while barely paying attention. Today, she forced herself to focus on appearing competent, but not exceptional. "Ready when you are, Scott," Hayes called out. Rose took a breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure she'd used to crack an eggshell. The rifle fired with perfect predictability, and she immediately knew the shot was centered. She fired 9 more shots in steady succession, each one placed with deliberate precision. When she finished, Hayes was staring through binoculars at her target with an expression of growing confusion. "Russo," Hayes said quietly, "what's her group?" Master Sergeant Russo activated the electronic target system and called back the results. "Sir, 10 shots, all within a 1.2-inch group, dead center." The silence that followed was profound. Rose set the rifle down and waited for Hayes' response, maintaining the same quiet demeanor she'd shown for 6 years. Morrison was the first to speak. That's expert-level shooting." "Ma'am," Russo said, approaching Rose with new respect in his voice, "where did you learn to shoot like that?" Rose looked up at him with innocent eyes. "Basic training, Sergeant, same as everyone else." Hayes was clearly struggling with the implications of what he'd witnessed. His carefully planned screening had backfired completely. Instead of providing grounds to exclude Rose, it had demonstrated that she was potentially the most skilled marksman on the entire base. "Scott," Hayes said slowly, "your shooting is acceptable. However, this competition involves much more challenging conditions than a basic qualification. Are you certain you want to participate?" Rose met his eyes directly for the first time in 6 years. "Sir, I understand the challenges, but I believe I can contribute to the demonstration." The word "contribute" hung in the air like a challenge. Hayes had designed his competition to demonstrate military superiority over civilian shooters. Now he was faced with the possibility that his most skilled participant might be a woman he'd been ignoring for 6 years. "Very well," Hayes decided. "You're accepted for the competition. However, I want to be clear, this is a high-visibility event with significant media coverage. The reputation of this base will be on display." "I understand, sir." As Rose walked away from the range, she heard Morrison whisper to Hayes, "Sir, what if she's better than us?" Hayes' response was quiet but clear. Morrison, she's a janitor who got lucky with 10 shots. When we get to 500 and 600 yards under pressure with cameras rolling, we'll see what she's really made of. Rose smiled to herself as she returned to her cleaning duties. Hayes had no idea what he'd just agreed to. In 4 days, in front of 100,000 live viewers, he was about to discover that some people aren't just lucky. They're legendary. The Invisible Woman had just become visible, and the real competition was about to begin. Hayes spent Wednesday night lying awake, staring at the ceiling of his base quarters while replaying Rose's screening test in his mind. Her shooting had been too precise, too effortless, too professional. No amount of basic training could produce that level of marksmanship without years of advanced instruction and practice. At 0430 hours, he gave up on sleep and drove to his office, determined to uncover the truth about Rose Scott before Friday's competition. If she was hiding something, he needed to know what it was before 100,000 viewers witnessed whatever surprise she might have in store. "Morrison," he barked into his phone, not caring that he was waking his aide at an ungodly hour. "Get down here. We need to dig deeper into Scott's background." By 0600, Morrison had arrived with coffee and a laptop, ready to conduct the investigation that should have been done 6 years earlier when Rose was first hired. "Start with military records," Hayes commanded. "She claimed 8 years of service. I want to know what she actually did during those 8 years. Morrison's fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing personnel databases that most base staff never even knew existed. "Sir, this is strange. Her military record is minimal. Basic service dates, honorable discharge, but most of the details are classified or missing." "What do you mean missing?" "I mean the files exist, but the content is redacted. Look at this. Her military occupational specialty code is blacked out. Her unit assignments are classified. Even her deployment records show locations, but no mission details." Hayes felt a chill run down his spine. Standard military personnel files weren't classified unless the individual had been involved in special operations, intelligence work, or other sensitive missions. "Keep digging. Check her emergency contact information, previous addresses, anything that might give us a clue about her real background." Morrison continued scrolling through databases, growing more puzzled by the minute. "Sir, her emergency contact is listed as Elena Martinez in Billings, Montana. No relationship specified, but there's a note that Martinez was also military, retired as a lieutenant colonel in 2018. Contact her." "Sir, it's barely dawn." "I don't care what time it is. Call her." Morrison dialed the number, putting the call on speaker as it rang. After 4 rings, a crisp voice answered with unmistakable military bearing. "Martinez." "Ma'am, this is Captain Morrison at Fort Braxton. I'm calling about Rose Scott, who listed you as her emergency contact." There was a pause that seemed to last forever. When Martinez spoke again, her voice carried a mixture of surprise and caution. "Is Rose all right?" "Yes, ma'am. She's fine. We're conducting a routine background verification for a special assignment, and we wanted to confirm some details about her military service." Another pause, longer this time. Hayes could practically hear Martinez thinking, weighing how much to reveal. "Captain," Martinez said finally, "what exactly do you need to know?" Hayes grabbed the phone. "Ma'am, this is Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, base commander. We need to understand Miss Scott's military specialty and training background." "Colonel Hayes." Martinez's voice turned formal and careful. "Rose Scott served with distinction in multiple combat deployments. Her record speaks for itself. Ma'am, with respect, her record is almost entirely classified. We need specifics about her training and capabilities." "Colonel, may I ask why you're investigating Rose? She's been out of active service for years." Hayes realized he needed to be strategic about how much he revealed. "She's applied to participate in a marksmanship competition we're hosting. We want to ensure she's appropriately qualified for the event." The silence that followed was so long that Hayes wondered if the call had been disconnected. When Martinez spoke again, her voice carried a tone he couldn't quite identify. "A marksmanship competition." "Yes, ma'am." "Colonel Hayes, what distance are you shooting?" The question was oddly specific. "Various distances, up to 600 yards. Martinez made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. "Colonel, Rose Scott holds the record for the longest confirmed sniper kill in military history. 600 yards is not a competition for her. It's a warm-up exercise." Hayes felt the blood drain from his face. Morrison was staring at him with wide eyes, clearly processing the implications of what they'd just heard. "Ma'am," Hayes managed, "could you clarify what you mean by record?" "Colonel, I was Rose's commanding officer for 3 years. I watched her make shots that redefined what we thought was possible. Her record kill was 1,847 yards in Afghanistan, but that wasn't even her most impressive shot. She once eliminated 3 targets at different distances within 30 seconds, saving an entire convoy from ambush." Morrison was frantically typing on his laptop, searching military databases for any mention of long-distance shooting records. After a few minutes, he found what they were looking for, and his face went pale. "Sir," Morrison whispered, "I found it. Staff Sergeant Rose Ghost Scott, 75th Ranger Regiment, Special Operations Command, multiple Bronze Stars, Silver Star, Distinguished Service Cross. Her record is—" "Jesus Christ, sir, she's a legend." Hayes grabbed the laptop and stared at the screen. The official record showed Rose's achievements in cold, clinical language that somehow made them even more impressive. 127 confirmed kills over 3 combat deployments. Longest confirmed kill, 1,847 yards. Mission success rate, 100%. Nickname, Ghost, for ability to eliminate targets without detection. Specialized in counter-sniper operations and high-value target elimination. "Ma'am," Hayes said into the phone. Martinez's response came loaded with implications. "Colonel, that's a story Rose will have to tell you herself, but I will say this. Rose Scott leaving the military was not her choice, and it was not justice." The call ended with Martinez offering no additional details, leaving Hayes and Morrison staring at each other in stunned silence. "Sir," Morrison said quietly, "we have a problem. This competition is supposed to demonstrate military superiority over civilian shooters, but our civilian janitor is actually the most decorated marksman in military history." Hayes began pacing behind his desk, his mind racing through the implications. In less than 48 hours, he would be hosting a live-streamed competition where Rose Scott, a woman who had been invisibly cleaning their base for 6 years, would demonstrate skills that would make every other participant look like amateurs. "Morrison, we need to understand why she left the military and why she's been hiding her identity for 6 years." "Sir, how do we investigate that without alerting her to what we know?" Hayes considered their options. Direct confrontation was risky. If Rose was hiding her identity for legitimate reasons, exposing her could create legal and public relations nightmares. But allowing her to participate in the competition without understanding her motivations was equally dangerous. "Contact Sergeant Chen," Hayes decided. "She's been here long enough to observe Rose's behavior patterns. Maybe she's noticed something we missed." 30 minutes later, Chen sat across from Hayes' desk, clearly uncomfortable with being summoned to the commander's office. "Sergeant," Hayes began carefully, "you've worked closely with Rose Scott for several years. Have you ever noticed anything unusual about her behavior or background?" Chen's expression became guarded. "Sir, in what sense?" "Military bearing, technical knowledge, anything that might suggest she has more experience than her current position would indicate." Chen was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her words carefully. "Sir, may I ask why you're investigating Rose?" "She's applied for the marksmanship competition. We're conducting due diligence." "Colonel," Chen said slowly, "Rose Scott is the most professional person on this base. She shows up early, works efficiently, never complains, and treats everyone with respect. If she's applied for the competition, I'm sure she has her reasons." Hayes detected something in Chen's tone, not quite defensiveness, but a careful loyalty that suggested she knew more than she was revealing. "Sergeant, have you ever seen Rose demonstrate any shooting skills?" "No, sir." "Any conversations about her military background?" "She doesn't talk about her past, sir." Hayes realized he wasn't going to get useful intelligence from Chen, but her responses confirmed his growing suspicion that several people on base had noticed Rose's professionalism without understanding its source. After Chen left, Hayes and Morrison spent the rest of the morning researching Rose's unit history and trying to understand the circumstances of her departure from active duty. What they discovered was a pattern of classified operations, redacted mission reports, and a sudden transition from active duty to civilian status, with no explanation in the official records. "Sir," Morrison said, reviewing a particularly heavily redacted document, There's something here about a classified investigation in 2018. Rose's name appears in the witness list, but everything else is blacked out. What kind of investigation? I can't tell. It's completely classified, but the timeline matches when she left active duty and when she started working here. Hayes felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Rose Scott, one of the military's most decorated snipers, had suddenly left active duty following some kind of classified investigation, then appeared at Fort Braxton as a janitor using minimal background documentation. She wasn't hiding from public attention. She was hiding from something specific, something serious enough to force her to abandon her military career and assume a completely new identity. "Morrison," Hayes said grimly, "cancel the competition." "Sir?" Rose Scott isn't just a skilled marksman. She's someone who was forced into hiding for reasons we don't understand. If we put her on camera in front of 100,000 viewers, we might be exposing her to whatever she's been hiding from. Morrison stared at his commander. "Sir, the media commitments are already in place. The participants have been notified. The social media promotion has been running for a week. Canceling now would be a public relations disaster." Hayes slumped in his chair, realizing he'd created an impossible situation. Proceeding with the competition meant potentially exposing Rose to danger. Canceling it meant professional humiliation and questions he couldn't answer. "What if we talk to her directly?" Morrison suggested. "Explain what we know and let her decide whether to participate." Hayes considered the option. It was risky. Confronting Rose about her hidden identity could backfire in numerous ways. But it was the only path that offered both honesty and the possibility of avoiding disaster. "Set up a private meeting," Hayes decided. "Tomorrow morning, before the competition setup begins. We're going to have an honest conversation with Rose Scott and find out exactly who we've been dealing with for the past 6 years." As Morrison left to arrange the meeting, Hayes stared out his office window at the base where Rose had been invisibly working while he'd been playing politics and chasing publicity. The woman he'd been ignoring was about to become the center of attention in ways that none of them were prepared for. The question was whether Rose Scott was ready to stop being invisible, and whether Hayes was prepared for the consequences of what he'd accidentally unleashed. Thursday morning arrived with unseasonable storm clouds gathering over Fort Braxton, as if the weather itself sensed the brewing confrontation. Rose reported to Hayes's office at 07:00 hours, having been told only that the colonel wanted to discuss, quote, "final competition details." She entered to find Hayes and Morrison waiting with expressions that immediately put her on high alert. Gone was Hayes's usual condescending demeanor, replaced by something that looked remarkably like nervousness. "Rose," Hayes began, his voice careful and formal, "please sit down. We need to have an honest conversation." Rose remained standing, her instincts sharpened by 6 years of survival and decades of military training. "Is there a problem with tomorrow's competition, sir?" "That depends," Hayes replied, "on who you really are." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Rose felt her carefully constructed world beginning to shift, but her expression remained neutral. After 6 years of practice, invisibility had become second nature. "Sir, I don't understand the question." Morrison opened a folder and began reading from documents Rose recognized as classified military records. "Staff Sergeant Rose Elizabeth Scott, serial number 123456789. 75th Ranger Regiment, Special Operations Command. 127 confirmed kills across 3 combat deployments." Rose's blood turned to ice, but she kept her voice steady. "Captain, I believe you've confused me with someone else. Longest confirmed kill, 1,847 yards, Afghanistan 2017, Morrison continued. Nickname Ghost. Multiple decorations including the Silver Star and Distinguished Service Cross." Hayes leaned forward, his eyes studying Rose's face for any crack in her composure. "The question, Rose, is why one of the military's most decorated snipers is cleaning toilets at Fort Braxton under a false identity." Rose considered her options in the split second of silence that followed. She could continue denying her identity, but Hayes clearly had access to classified records. She could walk away, but that would mean abandoning the life she'd built and starting over again. Or she could finally tell the truth and face whatever consequences came with it. "It's not a false identity," she said quietly. "Rose Scott is my real name. Everything else is complicated." "We have time for complicated," Hayes replied. Especially since you're scheduled to participate in a live-streamed competition tomorrow that could expose whatever you've been hiding from. Rose moved to the window, looking out at the base where she'd found 6 years of peace and anonymity. The storm clouds were building, mirroring the turbulence she felt inside. "Colonel," she began, "what I'm about to tell you is classified at levels you probably don't have clearance for. If I speak honestly, I need your word that this conversation stays in this room." Hayes and Morrison exchanged glances. "You have it," Hayes said. Rose turned back to face them, and for the first time in 6 years, she allowed her true self to show through her carefully maintained facade. Her posture straightened, her voice carried military authority, and her eyes held the steady confidence of someone who had faced death and emerged victorious. "In 2018, I uncovered evidence of a conspiracy involving the illegal sale of military weapons to hostile foreign governments. The operation was being run by senior officers in Special Operations Command, using classified missions as cover for arms trafficking." Morrison was taking notes, his expression growing more serious with each word. "When I reported the evidence through proper channels," Rose continued, "I discovered that the corruption reached into the highest levels of military leadership. Instead of investigating my claims, they decided to eliminate the witness." Hayes felt his stomach drop. "What kind of elimination?" "The kind that usually involves classified accidents during high-risk operations," Rose replied grimly. "I was scheduled for a solo mission in Syria that would have been my final assignment in more ways than one." "Jesus Christ," Morrison whispered. "Fortunately, I had allies who helped me disappear before the mission. Elena Martinez, my former commanding officer, arranged for my official death during what appeared to be a training accident. Rose Scott was buried with full military honors, while I assumed a new identity and went underground." Hayes was struggling to process the implications. "You've been in hiding for 6 years because you exposed arms trafficking by senior military officers?" "Not just any officers, Colonel. General Patricia Blackwood, Deputy Chief of Staff. Colonel Marcus Thompson, Special Operations Command. Major David Richardson, Intelligence Division. All of them building personal fortunes by selling American weapons to anyone willing to pay, including terrorist organizations." The names hit Hayes like physical blows. These weren't obscure personnel. These were figures whose careers he'd followed, whose decisions had shaped military policy for years. "The evidence I gathered documented over $500 million in illegal weapons sales over a 5-year period," Rose continued. "Weapons that were used against American forces, against civilian populations, against allies. Blood money that funded everything from terrorist attacks to drug cartels." Morrison looked up from his notes. "Ma'am, why didn't you go to the media? The FBI? Someone outside the military chain of command?" Rose's expression darkened. "Because the conspiracy included people in those organizations too. The arms trafficking operation wasn't just military. It involved defense contractors, intelligence agencies, and political figures who had too much to lose if the truth came out." Hayes was beginning to understand the magnitude of what Rose had stumbled into. "So you've been hiding here, working as a janitor for 6 years." "It was supposed to be temporary," Rose admitted. "Ilana was working to build a case that could expose the entire network safely. But the people involved have resources, connections, and no hesitation about eliminating threats. Every time we got close to going public, someone involved in the investigation would have an accident or suddenly transfer to a different assignment." "What about now?" Hayes asked. "Are you still in danger?" Rose was quiet for a long moment, weighing how much truth to reveal. "Colonel, General Blackwood is scheduled to attend tomorrow's competition as a VIP guest." The words hit Hayes like a lightning bolt. Morrison looked up from his notes with horror. "She's coming here?" Morrison asked. "According to the guest list Morrison sent out last week, yes. Along with several other senior officers, defense contractors, and political figures who happened to be part of the network I was investigating." Hayes felt the world spinning around him. His publicity stunt had accidentally created the perfect trap. Rose would be exposed on live television in front of the very people who had tried to kill her 6 years ago. "Rose," Hayes said urgently, "you can't participate in this competition. If Blackwood recognizes you—" "She won't," Rose interrupted. "I've changed my appearance, my mannerisms, my entire identity. For 6 years, I've been invisible even to people who knew me personally. But on camera, in front of 100,000 viewers, demonstrating the exact skills that made you famous. Colonel, Rose's voice carried quiet determination, I've been hiding for 6 years, while the people who betrayed our country continued their careers, their corruption, their crimes. Maybe it's time to stop hiding. Hayes realized he was witnessing something unprecedented, a decorated war hero deciding to emerge from the shadows to face the conspiracy that had destroyed her career. What exactly are you proposing? He asked. Rose moved back to the window, watching maintenance crews setting up equipment for tomorrow's competition. General Blackwood and her associates are coming here expecting to see a routine military demonstration. Instead, they're going to see proof that some ghosts don't stay buried. That's suicide, Morrison protested. If they tried to kill you once… Captain, they succeeded in killing me once. Rose Ghost Scott died 6 years ago, but tomorrow she's going to come back to life on live television, and this time she won't be fighting alone. Hayes felt a chill run through him as he understood what Rose was suggesting. You want to use the competition as a platform to expose the conspiracy. I want to use it as proof that I'm still alive, still capable, and still have evidence that can destroy them, Rose corrected. For 6 years, they've believed they were safe because their primary witness was dead. Tomorrow, they're going to discover they were wrong. Morrison looked between Hayes and Rose, clearly struggling with the implications. Ma'am, what kind of evidence are you talking about? Rose smiled for the first time since entering the office, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. Captain, when you're a sniper, you learn to document everything. I have video recordings of planning meetings, financial records of weapons transfers, communication logs between conspirators, and testimony from other military personnel who witnessed the crimes. Where is this evidence? Hayes asked. Safe, Rose replied. But scheduled for simultaneous release across multiple media platforms at exactly the moment I make my record-breaking shot tomorrow. Hayes stared at her, beginning to understand the full scope of what she'd been planning. You've been preparing for this for 6 years. Colonel, I've been waiting for the right moment to emerge from hiding and take down the people who betrayed their oath, their country, and their fellow soldiers. Your competition just happens to provide the perfect stage. The room fell silent as Hayes and Morrison processed the magnitude of what they'd stumbled into. Their simple publicity event had become the centerpiece of a plan to expose military corruption at the highest levels. Rose, Hayes said finally, what do you need from us? Her answer was simple and devastating. Just don't interfere. Tomorrow, when I take that shot, I need you to let Ghost Scott come home. Outside, thunder rolled across Fort Braxton as the storm moved closer. By tomorrow, everything would change. For Rose, for Hayes, and for everyone who thought some secrets could be buried forever. Friday morning dawned clear and crisp, the previous day's storm having passed, leaving behind perfect shooting conditions. Rose arrived at the range at 0530 hours, 2 hours before the official setup was scheduled to begin. She needed time alone with the equipment, the environment, and her own thoughts before the day that would either vindicate 6 years of planning or end her life. The shooting range stretched across Fort Braxton's northern training area, a carefully maintained facility that extended out to 1,200 yards. For today's competition, Hayes had approved the installation of targets at the maximum range, a decision he'd made weeks ago for dramatic effect, not knowing he was providing Rose with exactly what she needed. As she walked the range, Rose's trained eye cataloged every detail that would affect her shooting. Wind patterns created by the surrounding hills, temperature variations across the different shooting positions, the angle of morning sunlight that would transition to overhead glare by the time she took her final shot. You're here early, a voice said behind her. Rose turned to find Master Sergeant Russo approaching with a large equipment case. Unlike Hayes and Morrison, Russo carried himself with the confidence of someone who had earned his expertise through years of practical application rather than political maneuvering. Good morning, Sergeant, Rose replied, maintaining her carefully constructed civilian demeanor. I wanted to familiarize myself with the range before the competition. Russo set down his case and studied Rose with the assessment of a professional evaluating another professional. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Rose tensed, wondering if Hayes had revealed her true identity to the rangemaster. Of course. Yesterday's qualification test. That wasn't luck, was it? Rose met his eyes directly. What do you think, Sergeant? Russo smiled grimly. I think I've been training shooters for 20 years. and I've never seen anyone put 10 rounds into a grouping that tight without serious training and experience. The question is, what kind of training produces that level of precision? Before Rose could answer, the sound of approaching vehicles indicated that the media crews were arriving for setup. A convoy of trucks carrying camera equipment, satellite transmission gear, and technical personnel began parking near the range facility. "Sergeant," Rose said quietly, "today is going to be unlike anything you've supervised before. Whatever happens, I need you to remember that some people have skills that aren't reflected in their job descriptions." Russo nodded slowly. "Ma'am, whatever your background, you have my support. Good shooting is good shooting, regardless of where it comes from." As the media crews began unloading their equipment, Rose walked to the firing positions that had been set up for the competition. 5 stations, just as Hayes had planned: handgun at 25 yards, rifle at 100 yards, precision rifle at 300 yards, advanced marksmanship at 500 yards, and the finale at 800 yards. Rose paused at the final station. Hayes had quietly extended the maximum distance from his original 600-yard plan, probably hoping to create more dramatic footage. He had no idea that 800 yards was still within Rose's comfort zone, a distance she could manage with standard military equipment under ideal conditions. But Rose wasn't planning to use standard military equipment. At 0700 hours, she returned to her base housing unit and opened a storage locker she hadn't accessed in 6 years. Inside, carefully preserved in climate-controlled conditions, was the custom rifle system that had made her legendary. A Macmillan TAC 50.50 caliber rifle equipped with Schmidt & Bender optics and modified for her specific shooting style. The weapon had been declared lost during her staged death, officially destroyed in the training accident that had supposedly killed her. In reality, Elena Martinez had arranged for its secure storage, knowing that Rose might eventually need it for exactly this kind of situation. Rose assembled the rifle with the muscle memory of thousands of training sessions and combat missions. Every component was exactly as she'd left it. The custom trigger system calibrated to her finger pressure, the stock adjusted to her body dimensions, the scope zeroed to her shooting preferences. As she worked, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Package delivered. Good hunting. EM." Rose smiled at Elena Martinez's coded message. Somewhere on Fort Braxton, additional evidence had been positioned for discovery by investigators who would arrive after today's events concluded. Elena had spent 6 years building an ironclad case that would survive any attempts at cover-up or intimidation. At 0800 hours, Rose returned to the range carrying the rifle in a standard military case that wouldn't attract attention. The media setup was now complete. Multiple camera positions, a live streaming station, and commentary areas where military experts would analyze the competition for the online audience. She spotted the VIP viewing area that had been constructed for distinguished guests. General Patricia Blackwood would sit there in just a few hours, expecting to watch a routine demonstration of military marksmanship. Instead, she would witness the resurrection of the woman she'd tried to kill. "Rose," Hayes approached with obvious nervousness, "are you certain about this plan?" "Colonel, I've been certain for 6 years. Today I'm just finally getting the opportunity to act." Morrison joined them, carrying a tablet that showed the live stream's preliminary statistics. "Ma'am, we're already at 50,000 viewers and the competition doesn't start for another hour. The final viewership could exceed 200,000 people." Rose felt a thrill of satisfaction. More witnesses meant better protection and greater impact when she revealed the truth. "Captain," she said, "make sure the cameras capture every shot from multiple angles. People need to see exactly what happens today." As the morning progressed, the other competition participants began arriving. Jake Peterson, the hunting guide, brought his own rifle and immediately began studying wind conditions with the professionalism of someone who understood long-range shooting. The police officer and weekend target shooter seemed nervous but excited about the media attention. Rose observed them all with tactical awareness, noting their skill levels, equipment choices, and comfort with the situation. None of them would pose a competitive challenge, but they would provide the contrast that would make her performance appear even more extraordinary. At 1000 hours, the VIP guests began arriving. Rose positioned herself near the maintenance area where she could observe without being noticed, watching as a succession of high-ranking military officers, Defense contractors and political figures took their seats in the viewing area. Then she saw her. General Patricia Blackwood stepped out of a black sedan, her uniform immaculate, her bearing commanding the immediate attention of everyone present. She looked exactly as Rose remembered, tall, silver-haired, projecting an aura of authority that had once inspired respect but now filled Rose with cold anger. Blackwood was accompanied by two men Rose recognized from her investigation: Colonel Marcus Thompson, the Special Operations Officer who had coordinated weapons transfers, and Major David Richardson, whose intelligence connections had helped cover up the conspiracy. Seeing them together, relaxed and confident, confirmed everything Rose had suspected. They believed they were safe, that their witness was dead, that their crimes were buried permanently. They were about to discover how wrong they were. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes announced over the range's public address system, "welcome to Fort Braxton's Marksmanship Excellence demonstration. Today's competition will showcase the precision and skill that define American military training." Rose checked her equipment one final time. The rifle was perfect, her ammunition was hand-loaded to her exact specifications, and weather conditions were ideal. Everything she had planned for 6 years was finally coming together. As the competition began with the handgun stage, Rose watched the other participants perform adequately but unremarkably. The hunting guide showed solid fundamentals, the police officer managed respectable accuracy, and the weekend shooter struggled with the pressure of live streaming. Hayes and Morrison performed exactly as Rose had expected, competent but unexceptional shooting that would serve as a baseline for what the audience considered expert marksmanship. Lieutenant Walsh, the only other woman in the competition, surprised everyone by posting the best scores in the early stages. Her shooting was clean, precise, and professional, the result of genuine training rather than political connections. As the competition progressed through the various stages, Rose maintained her performance at a level that was clearly superior but not yet extraordinary. She wanted to build suspense, to gradually reveal her capabilities in a way that would maximize impact when she finally demonstrated her true skills. At 1,400 hours, they reached the final stage, 800 yards, the distance that Hayes believed represented the ultimate test of marksmanship. The other participants had struggled at this range. Peterson managed to hit the target, but with a grouping that spread over 12 inches. The police officer missed entirely with 3 of his 5 shots. Hayes and Morrison both hit the target, but without the precision that would impress anyone familiar with long-range shooting. Lieutenant Walsh had surprised everyone by maintaining accuracy even at extended distance, posting a respectable 8-inch grouping that demonstrated genuine skill. Then it was Rose's turn. As she approached the firing position with her custom rifle, Rose felt the familiar transformation that had made her legendary. The invisible janitor fell away, replaced by Ghost Scott, the sniper whose reputation had become legend in military circles. She settled into position with fluid precision, her body automatically assuming the perfect shooting posture developed over years of training and combat experience. Through her scope, the 800-yard target looked close enough to touch. But Rose wasn't aiming at the 800-yard target. At the far end of the range, beyond the official target line, a steel plate had been positioned at 1,500 yards for advanced training exercises. It was barely visible to the naked eye, a speck against the distant hillside that would require extraordinary skill to engage successfully. Rose made her final calculations: wind speed, temperature, humidity, bullet drop, spin drift, and a dozen other variables that would affect her shot. Then she settled her crosshairs on a target that nobody else had even noticed. The range fell silent as 200,000 viewers watched through their screens, waiting to see what the quiet janitor could accomplish at a distance that challenged even experienced marksmen. Rose took a breath, let half of it out, and prepared to announce her return to the world in the most spectacular way possible. Ghost Scott was ready to come home. The afternoon sun hung at the perfect angle as Rose settled behind her rifle, the familiar weight of the Macmillan TAC-50 grounding her in a way nothing else could. Through her scope, she could see the steel plate at 1,500 yards, a target so distant that most of the spectators couldn't even see it with the naked eye. In the VIP viewing area, General Blackwood was engaged in casual conversation with Colonel Thompson, both of them relaxed and confident. They had no idea they were about to witness their own downfall, broadcast live to over 200,000 viewers around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Hayes announced over the PA system, his voice carrying across the range, our final participant is Rose Scott from our base maintenance staff. She'll be attempting the 800-yard target that has challenged all of our previous shooters. Rose's finger found her radio transmit button, a modification she'd made to her rifle system years ago that allowed her to communicate without breaking her shooting position. Range control, she said quietly, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of a professional operator. Be advised, I am not engaging the 800-yard target. Hayes, monitoring all radio frequencies, felt his blood run cold. Rose, what are you doing? Colonel, I'm about to demonstrate what real marksmanship looks like. Camera crews, I recommend you adjust your lenses for maximum zoom. You're about to witness a shot that will redefine what people think is possible. In the media control booth, the director frantically signaled his cameramen to zoom out and search for whatever target Rose was actually engaging. Through their viewfinders, they spotted the distant steel plate that seemed impossibly far away. Jesus Christ, whispered the lead cameraman. She's aiming at something way out there. Morrison grabbed his binoculars and searched the far end of the range until he found the 1,500-yard target. Sir, that's nearly a mile. That's not humanly possible. Rose's voice came back over the radio, calm and professional. General Blackwood, I know you can hear this transmission. I want you to pay very close attention to what happens next. In the VIP area, Blackwood's head snapped up at the sound of her name. She grabbed the radio from the nearest aide, her face showing the first hint of concern. Who is this? How do you know my name? Rose's response carried 6 years of suppressed anger and cold determination. Patricia, it's me, Ghost Scott. I'm not as dead as you thought. The words hit Blackwood like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her face draining of color as she processed the impossible. Thompson and Richardson moved closer, their own expressions shifting from confusion to growing horror. That's impossible, Blackwood said into the radio, her voice shaking. Rose Scott died 6 years ago in Syria. No, Patricia. Rose Scott disappeared 6 years ago to avoid being murdered by her commanding officers. But today, she's coming back to life, and she's brought evidence that's going to destroy all of you. Through her scope, Rose could see Blackwood frantically gesturing to Thompson and Richardson. They were clearly discussing options, probably considering whether to order security to stop the competition or to simply leave the area immediately. Don't even think about running, Rose continued, her crosshairs steady on the distant target. There are FBI agents positioned around the perimeter, and everything you've said and done today is being recorded. Your only option is to sit there and watch justice finally catch up to you. Hayes grabbed his own radio, his voice urgent. Rose, whatever you're planning, we need to talk about this. Colonel, I've been planning this for 6 years. The time for talking is over. Rose began her final preparations, running through the complex calculations that would make her shot possible. Wind speed, 8 miles per hour, quartering from the left. Temperature, 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Humidity, 42%. Barometric pressure, 30.1, 5 inches. Bullet drop at 1,500 yards, approximately 27 feet. But this wasn't just about the physics of ballistics. This was about precision under pressure, about maintaining absolute focus, while the weight of 6 years of preparation culminated in a single moment. Camera teams, Rose called out, make sure you capture this shot from every angle. The world needs to see what happens when someone with genuine skill stops pretending to be something they're not. Through her scope, Rose could see the steel target clearly. It was a 12-inch square plate, painted white for visibility, mounted on a frame that would ring audibly if struck. At 1,500 yards, it represented a shot that would challenge even the most experienced snipers under ideal conditions. Rose, Lieutenant Walsh's voice came over the radio. Whatever your background, whatever you're planning, be careful. Some shots can't be undone. Rose felt a moment of appreciation for Walsh's genuine concern. Unlike the others, Walsh had demonstrated both skill and integrity throughout the competition. Lieutenant, thank you, but this shot has been 6 years in the making. Today, everyone learns that some people aren't just good at what they do, they're legendary. Rose settled her breathing, her heart rate dropping to the controlled rhythm she'd learned in sniper school. Through her scope, the world narrowed to a single point of focus, the distant target that would announce her return to the world. "Patricia," she said into the radio, "I want you to think about Staff Sergeant Jennifer Hayes, the intelligence analyst who disappeared right before she was scheduled to testify about your weapons trafficking. I want you to think about Captain Michael Rodriguez, the logistics officer, who had a convenient accident after he started asking questions about missing inventory." Blackwood's voice came back shaky and desperate. "I don't know what you're talking about. You killed them, Patricia, just like you tried to kill me. But, unlike them, I survived, and I've spent 6 years documenting every crime, every payoff, every murder that you and your associates committed." Rose made her final sight adjustments, accounting for the slight mirage she could see in the distance. Her finger moved to the trigger, applying the same gentle pressure she'd used in combat situations where lives hung in the balance. "This shot represents every soldier you betrayed, every life lost because of weapons you sold to our enemies, every family destroyed by your greed. At 1,500 yards, with the whole world watching, this is justice finally catching up." The range fell completely silent. 200,000 viewers held their breath as they watched through their screens, most of them not even understanding what they were about to witness. The camera crews had zoomed out to show both Rose and the distant target, creating a split-screen image that emphasized the incredible distance involved. Rose's training took over. Her breathing stopped at the natural pause, her heart rate settled to its minimum, and her entire world contracted to the precise point where her crosshairs intersected with the target. She squeezed the trigger with the same deliberate control that had made her legendary. The rifle fired with a thunderous crack that echoed across the range. The .50 caliber bullet left the barrel at 2,900 feet per second, beginning its arc toward a target that most people couldn't even see. For 3 seconds that felt like eternity, everyone watched and waited. Then, from 1,500 yards away, came the unmistakable ring of steel on steel as the bullet struck the target dead center. The range erupted in stunned silence, followed by gasps of disbelief from spectators who couldn't process what they'd just witnessed. The camera crews frantically zoomed in on the distant target, confirming what their audio had already announced. Rose had made the shot. At 1,500 yards, under pressure, with hundreds of thousands of people watching, she had delivered a precision strike that redefined what people thought was humanly possible. "Holy shit," someone whispered into an open microphone. Rose stood up from her shooting position with the fluid grace of a professional returning to the world after completing her mission. When she turned to face the stunned crowd, she was no longer the invisible janitor who had cleaned their toilets for 6 years. She was Ghost Scott, one of the most decorated snipers in military history, and she had just announced her return in the most spectacular way possible. "General Blackwood," Rose said into the radio, her voice carrying absolute authority. "That shot was at 1,500 yards. My record in Afghanistan was 1,847 yards. Today was just a warm-up exercise." In the VIP area, Blackwood was frantically trying to coordinate with Thompson and Richardson, but it was too late. FBI agents were already moving into position, guided by the evidence that Elena Martinez had spent 6 years preparing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rose announced to the cameras that were now focused entirely on her, "my name is Staff Sergeant Rose Scott, call sign Ghost, and for 6 years I've been hiding in plain sight while gathering evidence against military officers who betrayed their oath and sold weapons to terrorist organizations." The live stream exploded with comments as viewers realized they weren't just watching a marksmanship demonstration, they were witnessing the exposure of military corruption at the highest levels. "The evidence is already in the hands of federal investigators," Rose continued. "General Blackwood and her associates thought they were safe because they believed their primary witness was dead. Today they learned that some ghosts don't stay buried." Rose's shot at 1,500 yards wasn't just a demonstration of marksmanship. It was a declaration that justice, like her bullet, could travel impossible distances and still find its target. The invisible woman was invisible no more, and the world was watching her resurrection. The aftermath of Rose's shot unfolded with the precision of a military operation that had been years in the planning. Within minutes of her 1,500-yard demonstration, FBI agents emerged from positions around the base, moving with coordinated efficiency toward the VIP area where General Blackwood and her associates sat frozen in shock. Special Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to Sergeant Chen, approached the viewing platform with federal arrest warrants that had been sealed for 6 years, waiting for this exact moment. Her team had been positioned since dawn, coordinating with Elena Martinez and a joint task force that included representatives from the FBI, Military Criminal Investigation Command, and the Department of Justice. General Patricia Blackwood, Agent Chen announced, her voice carrying across the range as cameras continued broadcasting to a global audience that had swelled to over 400,000 viewers. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, arms trafficking, murder, and treason." Blackwood rose from her seat with the bearing of someone who had spent decades in positions of authority, but her face showed the recognition of someone whose world had just collapsed. "This is outrageous. I demand to speak with my attorney." "You'll have that opportunity, General. But first you're going to listen to something." Agent Chen activated a digital recording device, and Blackwood's own voice filled the air through the range's PA system. A conversation from 2018 discussing the elimination of problematic witnesses and the arrangement of training accidents for personnel who posed threats to their operation. The recording had been captured by Rose during her final undercover mission, transmitted to Elena Martinez moments before her supposed death in Syria. For 6 years, it had been the cornerstone of a federal investigation that had waited for the right moment to surface. Colonel Thompson attempted to leave the viewing area but found his path blocked by federal agents. Major Richardson sat motionless, his face pale with the realization that their carefully constructed conspiracy had been systematically documented and exposed. Rose approached the VIP area, no longer hiding behind the posture and mannerisms that had kept her invisible for 6 years. She moved with the confident stride of a decorated combat veteran, carrying herself with the authority that her skills and service record demanded. "Patricia," Rose said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of 6 years of suppressed justice, "you made one critical error when you tried to have me killed. You assumed that someone who could make impossible shots couldn't also make impossible escapes." Blackwood stared at Rose as if seeing a ghost, which, in a very real sense, she was. "How is this possible? We confirmed your death. We attended your funeral." "Elena Martinez is a very resourceful woman," Rose replied, "and someone who believes that justice is worth more than career advancement. While you were celebrating the elimination of your primary witness, she was helping me disappear so I could spend 6 years building an ironclad case against all of you." Agent Chen began reading the charges against each of the conspirators while cameras captured every moment for the live audience. The list was extensive. Conspiracy to commit treason, illegal weapons trafficking, murder of federal witnesses, fraud, racketeering, and money laundering. The evidence includes financial records showing over $500 million in illegal weapons sales, Chen announced. Video recordings of planning meetings, communication logs between co-conspirators, and testimony from multiple military personnel who witnessed these crimes. Lieutenant Walsh approached Rose with a mixture of awe and respect. "Ma'am, I need to ask, who are you really?" Rose smiled, the first genuine smile she'd shown in 6 years. "Lieutenant, I'm someone who learned that sometimes the best way to fight corruption is to become excellent at something they never expect you to do. For 6 years, I've been the invisible woman cleaning their messes while documenting their crimes." Hayes and Morrison joined them, both men still processing the magnitude of what they'd witnessed. "Rose," Hayes said, "I owe you an apology. We treated you as if you were invisible." "Colonel, you treated me exactly as I wanted to be treated. Invisibility was my weapon of choice. It allowed me to observe, document, and prepare for this moment." Master Sergeant Russo approached with obvious respect. "Ma'am, that shot at 1,500 yards. I've been teaching marksmanship for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it. What's your actual record?" 1847 yards in Afghanistan, Sergeant, but that was under combat conditions with a different rifle system. Today's shot was about precision under pressure, not maximum distance. The media frenzy was unprecedented. News networks around the world were picking up the live stream, and social media was exploding with commentary about the most extraordinary demonstration of marksmanship ever captured on video. But more importantly, the story was shifting from sports entertainment to investigative journalism as reporters began connecting the dots between Rose's allegations and years of unexplained military incidents. Elena Martinez arrived at the base 3 hours after Rose's shot, having driven from Billings, Montana to witness the culmination of their 6-year plan. When she saw Rose standing in full view, no longer hiding her identity, she broke into tears. "I wasn't sure this day would ever come," Elena said as they embraced. "There were so many times when I thought they would find you, or that we'd never have enough evidence to make the charges stick." "We always had enough evidence," Rose replied. "What we needed was the right moment to present it in a way that couldn't be buried or ignored." A live demonstration in front of 400,000 witnesses tends to make cover-ups difficult. Agent Chen provided updates throughout the evening as the investigation expanded beyond the primary conspirators. The weapons trafficking network had involved defense contractors, intelligence personnel, and political figures, whose careers were now ending in handcuffs and federal charges. "Rose," Chen said, "your evidence has opened investigations into 17 related cases involving military personnel who died under suspicious circumstances. Your decision to surface has likely solved multiple murders that we never had enough evidence to prosecute." As evening approached, Rose found herself in Hayes' office, no longer as a janitor being called to account for her work, but as a decorated veteran being offered the recognition she'd been denied for 6 years. "The Pentagon wants to restore your rank and offer you command of a new anti-corruption task force," Hayes explained. "They're also discussing a Presidential Medal of Freedom for your service in exposing this conspiracy." Rose considered the offer carefully. "Colonel, I appreciate the recognition, but I've learned something during my 6 years of invisibility. Sometimes the most important work happens when people aren't watching, when you're focused on the mission rather than the recognition." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that there are probably other conspiracies, other cases of corruption that need investigation. Maybe it's time for Ghost Scott to become officially invisible again, working undercover to root out the kind of corruption that nearly destroyed our military's integrity." Hayes nodded slowly. "A permanent undercover assignment investigating military corruption. You'd have resources, authority, and the backing of the highest levels of command. As long as I can remain invisible when necessary. Some of the best hunting happens when the prey doesn't know you're there." 6 months later, Rose stood at the podium in the White House East Room wearing her dress uniform for the first time in 6 years as the president presented her with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The ceremony was broadcast live, but this time Rose was fully visible by choice, representing every service member who had ever faced corruption and chosen justice over personal safety. "Staff Sergeant Rose Scott," the president announced, "demonstrated that courage isn't just about facing the enemy on the battlefield. It's about facing corruption within our own ranks and refusing to let injustice prevail." In the audience sat Elena Martinez, now promoted to full colonel and serving as Director of Military Ethics. Sergeant Chen had been promoted and transferred to Rose's new anti-corruption task force. Lieutenant Walsh had been selected for advanced training and was being groomed for command positions that would be based on merit rather than connections. Master Sergeant Russo had established a new marksmanship training program that emphasized the mental discipline and ethical foundation that true precision shooting required. The program was named the Ghost Protocol, honoring Rose's example of excellence combined with integrity. Hayes had been reassigned to oversee military ethics training, a position that used his experience with Rose's case to educate other commanders about recognizing and nurturing talent regardless of its source. After the ceremony, Rose returned to her new assignment, a classified position that officially didn't exist, working to identify and eliminate corruption within military ranks. She was invisible again, but this time by choice, and with the full support of legitimate authority. The woman who had spent 6 years cleaning toilets while planning the downfall of traitors had become the military's most effective weapon against internal corruption. She remained a ghost, but now she was haunting the right people. Some skills Rose had learned were too valuable to waste on visibility. The best hunters worked in shadows, and the most important victories happened when nobody was watching. Except this time, Ghost Scott was hunting with the full backing of justice, and her targets would never see her coming until it was too late. The invisible woman had chosen to remain invisible, but now she was invisible for all the right reasons. And somewhere in the military ranks, corrupt officers were about to discover that some ghosts never stop hunting. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.